So today it's going to be a lot of encouragement and vision casting. And my heart is that you would get God's heart for this whole homeschooling gig. And so I'm calling this session Homeschooling Your Teen, Your Finest Hour. And if we could get to the next slide, I've got a couple of funny little memes. And I'm curious, how many of you all just started homeschooling with the coronavirus, and you found yourself as an accidental homeschooler or a sudden homeschooler or a crisis in the middle of your living room homeschooler. And so this meme, I think it's pretty funny, and I think that all of us at some point, our first thoughts of homeschooling is it's just going to be this magical, beautiful time. Everybody sitting around like Dorothy with a picture perfect dining room table, living room with baked goods wafting into our children's nostrils, and everybody just sitting there getting their work done. But reality is sometimes different. And then if we're 5 days later, we can click to the next meme. This may be more of what it feels like. Here's Sue, 31 years old, homeschooling her kids for the last 5 days. Great job, Sue. Keep it up. And I don't know, that has definitely been me, where 5 days in, and I feel like I've aged about 50 years. And the second week, we are, click to the next slide. That'd be great. The second week, this meme kind of fit to me. The second week of homeschooling, if you see my kids locked outside, mind your own business. We're having a fire drill. Hashtag homeschool. Then 1 month later, you're into homeschooling, and if you're a Lucille Ball fan, I think we've seen all the reruns. It's that awful moment a month in that you realize this is your circus, and these are your monkeys. And if you're like me, you're like, how did I get here? And what happened to the person I used to know? And click to the next meme, and then all of a sudden you find, if you're got a year underneath your belt or a couple of years, this meme may fit you. Even though I was talking to myself, I'm not crazy. I'm a homeschool mom, and this was just a parent-teacher conference. So, so if you hear me babbling down the street, and then this is the new normal. The rest of the world is dealing with parents, dealing with school closures, and here you are having your own little party. And I love this. Homeschool parents, welcome back to my circus. Welcome to my circus. P.S. I've got your back. And this is what tonight's going to be. It's like we've got your back, and we just want to reassure you and give you some just encouragement and some heart wisdom. So the next slide is a picture of my family. This is us, the Ford family. I have 6 children, and my oldest is I have a daughter, and then I have bookend daughters, and I have 4 sons in the middle. And we have been homeschooling for 23 years, and we were somewhat of that accidental homeschoolers. We started homeschooling just out of convenience. My husband is in the ministry. He was traveling internationally all over the world, and I went with him quite a bit, and we decided this is a pretty great life. Let's take our kids with us. And so we had a 5-year-old when we started homeschooling, and I had a 3-year-old and a baby in tow, and we have been all over the world, and I have never regretted our decision. I've questioned it a few times because you have those days, but I'm really, really grateful. We've graduated 4 from our homeschool. We have 1 in college and 1 still in our homeschool who's 16 years old, my daughter Claire. And I've got to tell you that sometimes the reason you start homeschooling, the Lord catches you. It's like you're doing it for maybe one reason, and then you find out that God has you in it for a completely different reason. And that's what today is going to be about. So here's a picture of us, and this was a few years back. And I just want to tell you, I can tell you a lot about our family, but this is what I want to just give you some context is when we started homeschooling, I did not know many homeschoolers. I had a 5-year-old, and I decided at that moment that whatever I did, I wasn't going to do it alone. And so I started a homeschool group, a support group. And I didn't know anything about homeschooling and didn't know anything about curriculum, had never really even imagined that I would be a homeschool mom. I was really busy and had a lot of things I wanted to do, and homeschooling wasn't on the list. And so that first year I thought, how bad can it be? We can teach Hudson how to read. He's 5. And we can still, be working with my husband, Greg. We could still be doing the international travel, which is we were excited about being able to give our kids that experience and that education. And then, of course, it didn't take long to realize it's like, even though I read, it doesn't mean I'm a good teacher on how to read. And so I realized, humbled pretty quickly and started questioning myself pretty quickly. But the Lord was faithful, and the Lord started doing a work in me. And so what I have found with most of my friends who home educate their children, that you think you're doing it maybe out of convenience, maybe to save money, maybe you're not wanting to put your kids in the public schools, or maybe the private schools are too expensive. Maybe it's you're just concerned about maybe your kids' peer relationships. Whatever reason that you get into homeschooling, the Lord wants to reassure you that the greatest work He is doing is in our own hearts as the parents. And I have found that as much as I tried to replicate a classroom in my own living room, it wasn't going to happen. As much as I wanted to be a great teacher in all subjects, I wasn't going to be that. But there was a reason why our kids were given to us. The Lord had many more reasons than I thought that we were to homeschool. And so I wanted just to, if you're just jumping on, we'd like to have you put your name into the chat. We'd love for you to put the name of you can put the name of your kids or the ages of your kids. We are specifically talking middle school and high school, just homeschooling teenagers. And so I actually tutor juniors in high school, 11th graders, and we did a big study on world history, U.S. history, and one of my favorite historical people, leaders, is Winston Churchill, and I'm really fascinated by his leadership during World War II, and there was something that struck me about his position during World War II that reminds me a lot of what's going on today in our own world. And so let me just give you a little bit background about Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is a newly chosen British Prime Minister, and this was in 1940. And so May 10th, Nazi Germany began a massive attack against Holland and Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. And defending those countries Britain was defending those countries along with the French and the Belgium and then the Dutch. And the Germans were rallying a very aggressive battle plan. They were using radio, which is a very modern communication, to the troops, and the British were still hand-running their messages, hand-carrying their messages. The Germans were so much more savvy and so much more strategic and smart, and they caught the Allies completely off guard. The German tanks did a surprise attack, and in a couple of weeks, they defeated Holland, they defeated Belgium, they defeated Luxembourg, and France. France fell on June 14th of 1940. The following day, a brand new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, gets up to address the world with a speech that would really change the destiny of things. And you can't even imagine that. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what's going on right now with coronavirus. I mean, our whole world changed overnight. And within a month, I mean, everything's been closed and everything's been shut down. And we're not exactly sure what the world's going to look like tomorrow. And Winston Churchill a month in to his leadership, gives a speech, and I wanted to read a portion of that, if I may. Because I think it's so powerful. He says, "Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned upon us. And Hitler knows that he's going to have to break us on this island or lose the war. If we stand up to him, all Europe may be freed and the life of the world may move forward into broad and sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into an abyss of a new dark age made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will say, this was their finest hour." And it's amazing the power of words. And it was amazing to me that here it is, a newly chosen leader had the insight and discernment to see what was at stake. And that is what I hope to do in the conversation we get to have tonight, is that we would realize what is at stake, that there has been an enemy and an onslaught, and many of us have been caught unaware because of the tactics of the enemy and the surprise really onslaught that culture has presented itself for this generation. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Gen Z. So if you have a child that was born 1999 to 2015, this study was done by Barnett. Barnett is calling them the first truly post-Christian generation. The percentage of teens who identify as atheist is double that of the general population. 13% of the general population are atheists, while teenagers versus 6% of all adults. 37% believe it's not possible. This is this generation. 37, that is like almost 40% believe it is not possible to know for sure if God is real, compared to 32% of all adults. And for many teens, the truth seems relative at best, and at worst, altogether unknowable. As Barna released this slide in 2018, and I know those stats have even grown since then, but I wanted to read to you a definition of the post-Christian. What does that actually mean? We hear that, and I wanted to be able to define it so we can understand what we're talking about. A post-Christian society is not merely a society in which agnosticism or atheism is the prevailing fundamental belief, but it is a society rooted in history, the culture, and the practices of Christianity, but in which the beliefs of Christianity have been either rejected or worse, forgotten. And right now, I know that Europe has been in this place for a very long time, and the fact that we are here is heart-wrenching, because we were founded on Christian principles and on morality and biblical truths. But here we are in 2020, finding ourselves with almost 40% of our kids who have forgotten or rejected Christianity. And what does this mean? Okay, so the 84% of all Christians, 18 to 29-year-olds, admit that they have no idea how the Bible applies to their life. Only 3 out of 10, it's the next slide, from a Christian background stay faithful. So that's alarming to me. Youth drop out of religion at an alarming rate of 5 to 6 times the historic rate. They're saying right now that youth are dropping out of religion 30 to 40% versus one generation ago when it was 5 to 10%. Things are rapidly changing. So there is a battle over a generation. And moms and dads, that battle is our kids. I mean, there is an onslaught. There is an enemy, that is wanting our kids. And I just want to say to you today that not on my watch. And I want that to be in your heart, not on your watch, not my kids and not their friends. But we've got to understand what's going on culturally. One, taxes have been changed. I mean, the enemy, the culture has so quickly brought in technology and internet and social media and entertainment and gaming. I mean, things are happening so incredible. Knowledge, I mean, it is so crazy how fast they can get information and they can learn. And do you know that they're saying right now that this generation of kids, our high schoolers, are some of the loneliest that they have ever seen. Educational choices have left parents confused. It's not an easy. When I was growing up, there was the public school down the street, and we all went there, and nobody thought twice. But there are so many options, so many choices, and the problem with public education or government education is that they've taken God completely out of the mix, and so you don't know what you're going to get. When your third grader, goes to school, you don't know the agenda, you don't know who his friends will be, and it is really, and I think that's why there's been an onslaught of homeschool families. They're saying, you know what, we don't know, and we want to take control. And then you take education to a secondary level, and everybody, it's very common that it's very political and agenda driven, very concerned about the rate of our Christian kids that we're sending to public colleges who are losing their faith. I mean, it is unbelievable. And in all of this, parents have been really caught unaware, and we've taken a defensive posture. I mean, if you're like me, I mean, my husband and I are Christians. We love the Lord. We're pretty, just really, I think we just started this whole thing thinking, they're going to love God just because we love God. And they're going to be moral just because we're moral. And they're going to have, and some of that is going to transfer. But I think the enemies has gotten a foot into a lot of our homes and right into our living rooms, right into our phones, right into our iPads and our tablets. So the very first thing I want to talk about today is know your why. Know why you're doing what you're doing. And this goes for anybody. If you're homeschooling or putting your kids in Christian school or whatever you're doing, it says that the Bible says that people perish for lack of knowledge, where there's no vision, the people will perish. And so we have got to get a vision. We've got to figure out what is our why. So this is going to be a little bit of a dreaming session. Homeschooling your teen, it creates a demand for you to ask this question: what do you want? What is it that you want? But I'm going to ask another question. What does God dream about for your children? And I think some of the first things that, I'm concerned about as a parent of teenagers is that one is that I'm not going to fail them as their parent. That I am going to be faithful, be diligent in my homeschooling. But at the same time, I know it's really difficult and it's very intimidating. So for me, this exercise is so important because it allows me to think outside of academics. And I think academics are important, but if our children aren't walking in character, and if they do not have a humble heart and a desire to learn and a love for God, then really the best of educations aren't going to serve them well. And so for me, the question is, what kind of adult are you wanting your kids to be? So when you look at this little 13-year-old, it's like, what do I want you to be as an adult? Or if you have younger kids, like, what kind of person do I want you to be? Ask those questions. If you want a person that is a leader, then your homeschool is going to be it's going to be a leadership academy. If you want your kids to be integrous, then you're going to spend time teaching and working on integrity with your children. If you want your children to love God, then you are going to model that. You're going to display that as the parents of your home. You're going to show your kids this is what that looks like to ever with God. If you want them to be servants, if you be caring about the weak of society, then you're going to demonstrate that, and you're going to have an opportunity. So for me, this is where the rubber meets the road for homeschool family. What does God dream about for your children? What does He want them to be? And yes, I know that all of them are going to have, all of my kids are in professions. All of them have careers that are adults. But there is something even bigger than that. And that's the questions that I want to be asking you. What kind of adult are you wanting your child to be? You're partnering with God on this. Allow God's vision and dreams to become yours. And then homeschool with the end in mind. And I'm going to tell you just a quick little story. You can go to the next slide. I had a 12-year-old son, Hudson, and he was a musician. He played music. And, he went from kids' church to adult church, and we were having this awkward time of just like, what do I do with this like gangly 12-year-old sitting next to me in church, which sounds completely ridiculous that I would have to ask that question, but it just felt awkward. Like he was feeling awkward, we were feeling awkward, and it was during worship, and at one of these awkward moments, I looked at him, and he's not singing. He's not singing at all. He's just sitting there. And I started feeling mad. Like, I've raised a heathen kid. I mean, he does not know God. And he doesn't want to worship Him. He doesn't want to sing the song. And I started the more I thought about, this was during a worship service, the more I thought about it, the more agitated I got. And so I leaned over to Hudson after a few minutes. I said, Hudson, it's worship. And he replies back to me, I know. What made me madder? I said, Hudson, during worship, we sing with worship. We sing the songs. He says, I know, I'm singing. And I looked at him, and he wasn't moving his mouth. And I just sat there, and I closed my eyes. And it was a good thing we were in church, because I probably would have gone into a little bit of a lecture. And as I was closing my eyes, the Lord, I felt this little whisper to me. He said, leave him alone. He's mine. And he said, your role today is to pray for him. And so I started praying for him, and I spent I spent the next weeks and months just praying over him. And I love the scripture, Jeremiah 29:11. It says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. The Lord knows the plans He has for your kids. He said, I have plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And I could have totally blocked this kid from wanting to be in church with me for the rest of his life if I had moved any further into my, like my natural nature was to like give a lecture and like, okay, let's look up the word worship and let's look and see, what does the Bible say, all that. Well, a couple of months later, he goes to camp, and the pastor that took him called me up, and he goes, Kim, I was like, oh no, is everything okay? And he was 13 at this time, and he goes, Kim, I just want to call you. I want to talk to you about Hudson. I'm like, oh, is he okay? And he said, oh, Kim, I don't know what's going on right now, but I want you to be praying. He said, every time the worship starts, he is laying down on his face and he's crying. I go, what is he crying about? He says, I don't know. God is doing a work in him. And so I was like, oh, praise God. I don't know what that means, but praise God. And he comes back home from camp. And from that moment on, I was just like, oh, okay. This, I didn't really think much about it. But from that moment on, Hudson started singing. He started singing all day long. I mean, he would never stop singing. And I realized he had never sung out loud before in front of us. He ends up being a worship leader and jumps into worship, does it all the way through high school, college. And I just want to let you know that God knows the plans for your kids. We think we know, but He knows them. You can trust them, and your role is to know your why. If you want them to love God, that's something that's wrought with prayer. If you see things that you've said something and maybe you aren't seeing a change, pray over them. The next scripture, Psalm 45, says, many, Lord my God, are the wonders you have done and the things that you've planned for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, they would be too many to declare. And I believe that's what God's desire, His heart, that's who He is for you and your family. he wants to do wonders. And those are things that you can't do by yourself, right? I can do a lot of things by myself, but I can't do wonders. Well, I don't know. Sometimes, what I pull out of the kitchen, can be a wonder. But the things that you can't do, God is saying, hey, I want to partner with you on that. Number 2, in fighting this battle over this generation, is know who you are. And I have a picture here of, you guys might recognize this from, oh gosh, is it, it's Tolkien. I can't even think of the name of it. And of a warrior getting ready to hit the enemy with his bow and arrow. And the next scripture, Psalm 127, completely transformed my life. It says, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. Well, we know that. We speak that. And we're all, if you're like me, I'll look and I'm like, you're not a gift today, And I found that if they aren't a gift, then probably we need to do some work in some areas, right? I'm not a gift every day either. But they said that children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. So God's saying they're a gift, they're a reward, but he compares them to arrows. He says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they speak with their enemies in the gate. And I love this idea that you are an archer. I mean, you are a lot of things, but God is calling you a warrior with a bow and arrow in his hand. And those arrows are your kids. And it's interesting to me, it was the most, bow and arrows at the point when this was written was the most accurate offensive weapon of the day. If they wanted to get an enemy, they got out their arrow, and they spent years crafting arrowheads and getting shafts of their arrows straight and practicing their target hitting. And it took years to build arrows and to practice over and over again. So when they were faced with the enemy, they had a weapon they could count on. I think it's interesting. The next slide, Krista. I think it's interesting that God has called you the archer, and he's called your children arrows. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to look at and say, you know what, these kids aren't just to take up space. They aren't for me just to raise up, to feed, to bathe, to clothe, and then to send them to college and then wait for grandkids. No, God is saying, you know what, they're a blessing, they're a gift, they're a reward, but they're an arrow. They're weapons that you're going to send into the future. And I really believe our sons and daughters are called, and they are chosen to be the bearers of light, bearers of good news. And God trusts you with your own salvation. How much more he trusts you with your children. So I think it's interesting. The arrows don't say where they're going to go. Parents pull the arrow. The archer pulls the arrow and says, you know what, this is where I'm going to target you. And you set your targets. You set your targets. Like, I'm targeting you for the kingdom of God. I'm going to target, you're going to be a worshiper. I'm going to target, you're going to have a good work ethic, and that you are the one that determines it. So it really goes hand in glove to know your why, but also know that you're the parent. God's anointed you. He's gifted you to raise your kids. He didn't give them to somebody else. He gave them to you. I mean, we may want to pass them off sometimes to someone else, but they are yours because he trusts you with them. And he's like, God, I want you to be, he wants to partner with him. Number 3 is know your team. Now, this is very interesting. It's like you can know your why, and you can know who you are, but it's all about this team. And know who they are, know what they love, know who their friends are, know who their mentors are, who are they really idolizing, what are they listening to. I mean, really get involved. No matter what you end up doing educationally, get involved. But I can tell you, homeschooling meshes those worlds. And it has been so beautiful for me as I've homeschooled my children that I've gotten to know my kids. And what we don't realize during that time is you're building a relationship. And really, that relationship, they say after all those burn tests, that parents continue to be the single greatest influence on their children's faith. They can go to great youth groups, they can go to a great church, they can listen to Christian music, they can read their Bible. But they go to Christian camps, but they say that parents are the single greatest influence on their children's faith. So if we want to turn those stats, then we've got to know our kids. We've got to be involved with them. What a child sees and hears that faith actually makes a difference in mom and dad's life, they're much more likely to follow suit. So talk about what God's done in the past. Talk about what God's doing in your lives now. Let them see faith in action. And also, I mean, we had a situation this past week with one of my sons, and he was not where he wanted to be, and in a college class. And we prayed. And I asked him, I said, hey, what do you want? And he told me. I said, well, why don't you pray for that? And you know what? The Lord did that. And so, but also what happens as you get to know your teen, you start building a trust relationship. And you think it's all about when they're teenagers and, and when they're juniors and seniors in high school. But really, when they become adults and they're deciding who they get to marry, and they're deciding their jobs, and they're deciding whether to go to this college or that college, when they're making these big lifetime decisions, we've been so blessed that our kids love the Lord, and they also trust us, and they come to us for counsel. It's not unusual for my husband to get calls from his adult sons on, hey, Dad, what do you think about that? And hey, what do you think? When they start dating their girls, they want us to meet them. They want us to be a part. So I'm just saying, you think you're homeschooling and you're doing it because of the academics, but what you don't realize, that's one piece of it. And we're going to give you some practical tips in a minute. But the other thing that is the most important thing is that adult relationship where they are coming back in and say, hey, I need some counsel. I'd like some wisdom, and I trust you because you've loved me and you've known me. Young adults are likely to share their parents' religious beliefs and participation in church if they feel like they have a close relationship with the parents. So the next one is know your plan. So know your why. Know your why. You got to know your why. You got to know your teen. You've got to know who you are, and you also have to know who God is. And I love this illustration of this picture, and I put this because, in a relay race, who do they pick to carry the baton for the end of the relay race? They always pick the strongest runner. And I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like, 21st century parenting isn't the easiest. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? But I also feel like the Lord is saying to us, I've picked you for this season. I've picked you to parent now in 2020 around the coronavirus with all this craziness. I've picked you. And God is saying, I'm passing you a baton. And the thing about it is he's not just passing a baton to us. He's saying, you know what? I want you to know who I am and who I am for you. And we can go to the next slide. And he wants you to know your plan. And set a goal to build a relationship with your children. God is saying, hey, this is paramount. Time equals love. Love equals time. Pick an educational plan that serves your why. There's a lot of options out there for homeschooling your teenagers. And pick one that works for you, that encourages you, that excites your children. When you look at it, it's like, man, this is more than math. This is more than history. This is worldview. This is God showing who he is. I mean, the pursuit of education is really the pursuit of God. And so pick an educational plan that serves your why. Academics should serve you and not you serve them. So they're to be a blessing to you. They're to be a blessing to your children. And I tell you, we're going to talk a little bit about this, but there are some incredible helps for high school and for middle school. And really, to really create the children that are self-learners, that like are hungry to learn and enthusiastic to learn. And I find that that comes a lot because I'm enthusiastic to learn. And so I'm just the lead learner. I'm just the one to say, hey, I haven't done Algebra 2 in, let's say, 25 years. And so we're going to get into this together. And we are going to learn this together. And be patient with me. I'm going to be patient with you. And not that we don't get mad and get frustrated, but I'm just saying, let academics serve you and you not serve them. Find something that works for your family. Find a curriculum that works for your family. And the main thing I would say is don't go alone. So Apollo 13, you guys are familiar with the movie. I think we just had it celebrated a 20-year, 20? No. Okay. We celebrated a big anniversary for Apollo 13. I meant to look it up. I forgot how many years ago, but it happened in April. I think I have it right. Oh, April 1970. Okay, so it was 50 years ago, Apollo 13. And if I remember, I was, in elementary school when this was happening, and everybody was so excited. They'd even turn on the TVs at school so we could watch this. But they had a malfunction that happened in space. And this is some dialogue from that moment, from the control panels. It says, we've got a parachute. So Henry Hurt is saying this. We've got a parachute issue. We've got a heat shield issue. And we've got an angle of the trajectory and the typhoon. I mean, there's so many variables. I'm at loss. So what was going to happen is the whole world was going to see, we're going to see these 3 astronauts die in space. And all of these problems were having to be solved. And Chris Kraft comes in and he says, I know what the problems are, Henry. This could be the worst disaster NASA's ever experienced. Next slide. And Gene Kranz comes up and he says this. And he says, with all due respect, sir, I believe this is going to be our finest hour. And let's go to the next slide. And so I kind of did this playoff on Teenager 13, okay? Not Apollo 13, but Teenager 13. We've got the lazy attitudes, the youth group, the internet, the promiscuity, the music, and the college entrance exams. There are so many variables. And I just want to tell you all as parents, this is true. There are so many things that you cannot figure out all at the same time. And you're going to feel like you're at a loss. Let's go to the next slide. And I feel like the Lord is saying, yeah, I know what the problems are. And he's like, yeah, this could be a bad thing. I mean, this could be really bad. But I also feel like God is saying this with all due respect, Mom and Dad. I believe this is going to be your finest hour. And Deuteronomy 7:9 is one of my favorite scriptures. Know therefore that the Lord your God, he's faithful. And I want you just to let that sit for a second. He's faithful. Keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. You are a link to another generation. You are a link to a legacy. The legacy is not what we leave our children. It's who we leave our children. It's who they are, and who God has called them to be. And I think so many times we think, oh, I don't know in this world today what it's going to look like. And I just want to encourage you in this next slide. It says your finest hour. And John Maxwell, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's a leadership guru. He's written a lot of books. And somebody came to him about probably 30 years ago. And they came to him and said, John Maxwell, this is the hardest time to raise kids. What do you have to say about it? And he said something that's resonated with me. He goes, are you kidding me? I think it's the greatest day to raise kids. And the person who was questioning was like, what are you talking about? He said, if you can teach your kid to be honorable, if you can teach your kid to be a hard worker, if you can teach your kid to be honest, he said, they are going to be a light in such a dark world that doesn't know honesty, that doesn't know integrity, that doesn't know a work ethic. Your kid is going to shine. And you add Christ to that mix, and I'm going to just encourage you, they're your arrow that you're going to launch into an incredible future that will need their light and their love. They are an answer. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I've seen as parenting is fear. Is like fear just wants to come in and just kind of just catapults at times. Like, wow, what about this? And what about this kid? And what about this attitude? And just it was simple and it's funny. Like the kid wasn't singing at church, but that's nothing compared to other things that we walk through. And I feel like the Lord wants to just say, you know what? Who are you going to believe? Which report? Are you going to believe what you see? Are you going to take my word and say, you know what? I've given you promises that these kids are for signs and wonder. These kids are to be light and darkness. So we don't need to be afraid of the war. And I think about Winston Churchill, and it's like, I'm sure he was shaking in his boots. He saw 5 countries fall around him. I mean, all of his ally team, was gone. United States didn't even offer to help at that point. I mean, they were not coming to anybody's aid. And at that point, he stood boldly for what was right, what God wanted for his nation and for the world. And I believe, honestly, that homeschooling is not just happenstance. It's not just a good idea. I think it's God's plan, really for parents to disciple their family, disciple their children. He uses math to do that. He uses science to do that. I mean, he'll use history to do that. But he wants to use this vehicle of academics, of home education, to be this beautiful parents teaching their children, hey, this is a world that God created, and we're going to study math because God wrote a book called Numbers, and for some reason it's important to him, and we are going to learn it, and we're going to figure it out because you've got a good brain. And honestly, as your parent, my brain's pretty good too, and we're going to figure it out, and we're going to have to dust off some cobwebs and roll up our sleeves, get our feet dirty. But I can tell you, the time is going to go fast. I mean, the days are going to seem long, but the years are going to go fast. And you're going to be like me. You're going to look at that picture of all these adult kids. It's like, oh, where did that time go? But I can tell you what, I can look at those pictures, and I'm like, we gave everything we had. We taught, we loved, we sacrificed, we cried, we fought, we struggled, we were in despair at times, but God is faithful. He's always been faithful. So we are going to take the next few minutes and talk through some practical tips, and then we're going to hopefully have a few minutes for some Q&A. So I'm going to invite my friends Krista and Renee on the call with us, and we're going to ask, first of all, about keeping records for high school and middle school. Renee, you want to answer that?
Sure. It's important, kind of. So actually, I kind of group it together with transcripts. Like transcripts is just one of those things that you have to have. But I always tell people, don't sweat it. When I did my first 2 kids' transcripts, I went online, I looked for some options, I picked one, and I just replicated it. And we've had to give it out from time to time, but it has not been this doesn't have some special stamp of a seal thing on it. We just gave the transcript, and they were fine with that. So, but I, for both of my kids, kept a portfolio just in case anyone asked, like, what did you actually do for math? Okay, well, we did Saxon, and these were the grades that they got on it. Or we read these books for literature. And so I have actually never had to present that to anyone, but I've always had it so that if anyone wanted it, I could verify what I put on the transcript. And it's fun to go back and look at some of their old papers now that 2 of them have graduated from college, and I have one that's working on her master's thesis, and it's fun to go back and look at some of her old papers and go, see how far you've come? Like, look what you can do now. So
it's good. What about you, Krista?
It's a challenge. I'm actually about to graduate my first one. He's a 2020 quarantine graduate. But it's been an exciting journey, and it dawned on me a few minutes ago that I'm starting high school again in the fall with my younger two. So it's just amazing to watch how far they come between 7th grade and 12th grade. There's so many changes in those 6 years that.
Yep. Can I say something about middle school real quick? Because I think it's really important for parents to know that there's so much going on for these middle school kids. And I have had 4 boys, and I had a friend advise that just your boys are they're gonna have a lot of energy, and how they express all the changes going on is going to be really different. And they're going to feel like they're slipping away a little bit. I don't know if you felt that, Krista, with your boys when they hit middle school. But she said, don't worry, they'll come back. And it may just be like you just see they're more into dad stuff, and they're not as interested in cuddling with you on the couch as they were when they were in 6th grade, and those kinds of things. And so, but I think as far as record keeping, I really started getting more serious. I kept records every year just because I was always like afraid that somebody would come and want to see something, like Renee said, but I never had to show anybody anything. But I just kept records, and then in freshman year in high school is when we got more serious and actually kind of played around with grades and just because college transcripts, they'll want to see that kind of stuff. They want to see how much credit. And there's a couple of great just templates out online that I've used.
We're about to put one up in the membership side of Homeschool Oklahoma.
Right.
It might be a week or 2 before it's up, but it's coming.
Because colleges they do want to see a record of what you have done, and you can go to the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and they have some samples of what's required for college, and just a diploma. And I kind of follow that.
So I'll kind of piggyback off of that. So I tell people, just like you were talking about, Kim, always keep the end in mind. Yeah. So if you know that your kid wants to be, like I had a kid I just knew wanted to be an engineer. So I went and looked up various schools that had engineering programs, colleges that had engineering programs, to look and see what was required for her to go to those schools. And then we designed her curriculum and the classes she took around what was going to be required. Mm-hmm. And so I often get asked, are we required to take Oklahoma history? It's an awesome class to take. Like, everyone should do it. It's fun. But it's not required. It's required if you go to public school to take it, but it's not required for your student to take it. If you want to do it, absolutely. But universities are not going to say, oh, you didn't have Oklahoma history, so you can't come to our university. So it's important to go and look and see, know in mind, if you're going to go to a technical school, what do they require? Most schools require 4 years of English. So you need to make sure that you have 4 years of English. But you might not have to take physics if, your child is going to go into marketing, and that might not be their strength. Yeah. So it's always kind of important to think about what is the end. We're also going to be putting up a high school planner, which is just a grid that you can use That's already done, so that should be up in the next couple of days. And I always tell everyone to use pencil, because what happens is when you start in 9th grade, you have to adjust things from year to year. So that way you can change things when you get to 11th grade. Maybe you didn't get to do government class. So.
Okay, the next question we have is, what about socialization? And I'll throw in there sports programs, plays, debate, etc. So what about socialization? I'll tell you what I say about socialization. Hi, Vicki. Vicki's joining us for a vendor workshop in a few minutes, but she's also going to talk a little bit about sports. But I think socialization is very overrated. Okay, and most kids, we think they're socialized because they've been with 20 other third graders, and we're concerned that our kid is not going to have the same experience. Well, one, if you're part of a family, your kids are socialized, and two, I think that there is something benefit to learn from older siblings and younger siblings versus the 20 third graders. It's almost like, what do 20 third graders do when they're by themselves? Probably not a whole lot of good, right? And so, but I think for socialization, I mean, like for us, it's always just been what Greg and I were interested in, what our kids were interested in, and we built friends around that, just around life, around debate, around musical theater, around church. And one thing that we did for our middle school and high school kids I thought was really important is we always had them serving in some roles at church. Was a good venue for us, and usually that was with the children's church. And so just looking for ways for them to get experience with people. It happens just naturally. So, Tag, who's next? Who wants to add to that? Vicki, you want to talk a little bit about sports?
Well, if you're in Oklahoma, you're on good ground because there are a couple of sports programs. If you're in the Tulsa area, there's NOAA homeschool sports. There's always Y Sports, so that homeschoolers can join in on. And if you look around at your small private schools, a lot of times they will, if they have sports programs, they'll take homeschooling kids up through middle school. They are not allowed to do it in high school. But there's a lot. At NOAA, for example, they have literally every sport: tennis, track, football, soccer, baseball, basketball. If you're homeschooling up here in Tulsa, and I know Oklahoma City is similar. So if your kid wants to play a sport, if they're an athlete, and I just want to add on to that, if they can play college sports, if they're a talented athlete and homeschooling, they still can play college sports. You do not need to put your kids in high school so that they can play college sports. The NCAA has made provision. There's a great Facebook page group that's NCAA homeschooling, so you can get on there, ask all your questions, but it takes a little bit more work from the parents. But if you know what you need to do when they enter high school, it's pretty seamless. I know a number of kids who have gone from homeschooling to playing college sports. So,
Krista, you guys are involved with homeschool band and theater.
Yeah, we've done Tulsa homeschool band and strings, which I know is available all over the state. Mm-hmm. My son does theater tech with Courtyard Theater here in Tulsa, and my oldest son, and he is a violist, so he's also taken viola lessons. He's played with the Bartlesville Symphony through an invitation from his so a lot of things like that can still happen according to who you're working with. Mm-hmm. So that's been lovely. My younger two are not so interested in sports or music. I'm not sure what to do with them, but I'm sure God's got an idea.
There are so many things. We've done 4-H. There are, what's the Boy Scout club that's not Boy Scouts?
Trail Life.
Trail Life. Kids do Trail Life. We've done chess club. We have done everything. Book reading clubs, libraries. There's so many things. I don't know if that's a real concern for people. But it shouldn't be.
We honestly have so many options for things to do that we could never actually do our schoolwork if that was our goal.
True.
That's so true. So true. The next question, maybe we should close off with this one, is what will my child be ready for college? That's like a whole discussion in itself. So, Oklahoma homeschool people, how do you want to handle that question?
Absolutely. Yes, they will.
If you show up and do the work you plan to do every day and you're a consistent student, then you're going to be prepared for college if you've continued to do the next thing. But if you decide that you're not going to do math, or you're not going to write ever, or you're not going to read ever, well, then you might not be ready for college. Not that you couldn't be, but that you chose not to. So every day that we show up and we're consistent to work our plan, we're making progress towards the goal of finishing high school and graduating. But there's other options if you don't want to go to college. There's other options if you there's trade schools that you can still get into as long as you've met their requirements. But really, homeschooling, you have to choose to meet the requirements that are coming.
Right.
Let me just say this. I have had friends whose kids were lacking in math. And colleges are so hungry for students that they're very willing to put them on a remedial, it's not even, they don't call it that, but just kind of a bridge program to get them ready. So it's not necessarily college credit, but it's credit to get them ready so they can do college math. And I've seen more and more colleges are doing that. So, obviously what Krista said, do the hard work, be faithful, be committed, but also realize that if that is a goal, I've seen kids be very successful in college because they were ready to work when they got there too.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so interesting, the statistics show that typically homeschoolers score above average on the ACT and the SAT, and they score 15 to 30% higher on standardized tests. And so the hard work does pay off. And all four of us have kids that are either headed into college or have graduated for college. And so they've done really well.